January 2009, a man in West London made a panicked 999 call.
Someone put poison in our food.
You think your ex-girlfriend's done it?
Yeah.
Hours later, the caller, Lakhvir Cheema, was dead. Alarm bells rang for medics who suspected foul play.
People don't just die not from these symptoms, and it was something that the nurses and doctors had never seen before.
In a highly unusual investigation, detectives uncovered a love triangle as toxic as the poison that had killed Lakhvir Cheema.
Lucky's former lover, Lakhvir, couldn't bear the thought that he was going to marry someone else.
She was jealous, and obsessively jealous.
In an impotent rage, Lakhvir Singh chose a particularly cruel death for the man she claimed to love.
Your mind knows that your body is closing down and collapsing around you, and you are dying an agonizing death.
Devastated at losing her long-term lover, Lakhvir Singh planned to stop Lakhvir Cheema finding happiness with anyone else. She expected to get away with murder, but was finally exposed as one of Britain's most evil killers. When a previously healthy couple fell dangerously ill in West London in 2009, medics knew immediately that something unusual had happened.
We had all these different things that we were considering. Is it poisoning? Is it contamination within the food chain?
The police had to go to DEFRA, the Health Protection Agency, and even the botanists at Kew Gardens.
Eventually, the clues led to a conclusion: the couple had been poisoned with Indian aconite, a perennial plant which is the source of one of nature's most dangerous poisons.
It's an exceptionally unusual poison in this country. The last case of aconite poisoning was in 1882. Never since, and poisoning in any event is pretty unusual in this country in homicide cases.
By using this rare toxin, had Lakhvir Singh gambled on getting away with murder?
Until relatively recently, in the last 30 years, you couldn't analyze for it. So previously, we were very much dependent on one, high concentration being present, real knowledge that it was that particular one, so you knew what you were looking for when you started out. So those advances enable us now to identify toxins at a much, much lower concentration.
Lakhvir Singh had woven what must have seemed like an ingenious plot. She'd not reckoned on the tenacity of London's homicide detectives. This killer's story begins in the Punjab region of northwestern India in October 1964.
We don't know a lot about her background. She came to this country, and in July 1985, Lakhvir had an arranged marriage, and she and her husband lived in Southall.
Singh worked for a catering company in Heathrow, which was very close to Southall and was a major local business.
The couple had 3 children together, but I don't think it was a particularly happy marriage.
Singh was caring for her husband because he had cancer, and on occasions he actually went to India for treatment.
In 1993, a new lodger brought some light into 28-year-old Lakhvir Singh's otherwise difficult life.
Lakhvinder Cheema was known as Lucky, that was his nickname. His sister was married to Singh's brother.
Lakhvir Cheema arrived in England in his early 20s. At that point, he was already married.
His marriage had failed, and so suddenly he needed somewhere to stay.
And he moved in with Lakhvir Singh and her husband as their tenant, as a lodger in their house in Southall.
Lucky worked for Rent-A-Kill, and he was described as a model work colleague.
His colleagues thought he was always smiling, he was well known, he was a popular bloke to work with.
23-year-old Lakhvir Cheema's charms were not lost on his new landlady, Lakhvir Singh.
From the moment he arrived, our understanding was that he formed a sexual relationship with Singh, and that carried on for at least 15 years.
He was quite charming, quite charismatic. She was probably quite vulnerable in a lot of ways. You can see how that situation might happen.
Clearly, Lakhvir had very, very strong feelings for Lucky. And I think Lucky had probably convinced her that they would probably have a future together.
It was a dangerous game to play in the close-knit West London community.
I'm sure Singh felt trapped in this unhappy marriage with her husband when Lucky was really the light of her life and really the only person she really loved.
Around 2006, Lucky moved into his own home 6 miles from Southall.
He bought a 4-bedroom property in Feltham.
He occupied the ground floor of that house and rented out the other rooms, the upstairs rooms, to tenants. And they had shared facilities, so they all shared the facilities of the kitchen.
Lucky's tenants soon became familiar with his attentive friend, Lakhvir Singh.
To all intents and purposes, it's like as if they were married, because she would turn up and do all of the cooking and the washing and the tidying up, and I suspect that when she did that at Lucky's home, she'd go and do the same thing at her home.
Lucky sent to Lakhvir on her birthday in October 2008, "You be my loved and I will give you all my love."
The affair had, by this time, become an open secret among Lakhvir Singh and Lakhvir Cheema's loved ones.
It was a very unhappy relationship culturally, both for her family and for his family.
In the autumn of 2008, 15 years into their illicit affair, this uneasy equilibrium was shattered when 39-year-old Lucky began looking to the future.
On the 18th of October 2008, Lakhvir Cheema met a young woman at a local Sikh temple in Southall.
Gurjeet had come to the United Kingdom in 2008. She came here illegally, got a false passport.
Gurjeet was much younger than Lucky. She was 21 years old.
She was introduced to Lucky with a view to them being married. And they plainly got on. They came quickly, I believe, to love each other. They appeared very happy together.
News of the courting couple's plans came as a shock to Lakhvir Singh.
By the 2nd of November 2008, so really just within a few weeks of them first meeting, their engagement was announced.
Lucky told Singh that he wanted to start a relationship with someone else and have children.
Singh reacted with absolute fury to this devastating blow to her plans. She started texting Lucky with threatening messages, saying that she was going to come and burn his house down. She was absolutely furious by what she clearly saw was an absolute betrayal.
She was obviously devastated, angry, hurt, sort of a mixture of pleading with him to come back and being abusive to him around, how could you treat me like this?
Lakhvir Cheema did not make a clean break with his long-term lover.
Lucky, in fact, had kept Singh's hopes up. He even sent her a text saying, "I live for the moment where you can see each other in a dream."
While telling Gurjeet that his affair with Singh had been over for years, Lucky continued to see his secret lover.
Even though he was saying he wanted to form a relationship with Gurjeet, he was still having a sexual relationship with Singh at the same time. And he was expressing his love for her and that the two of them would always be together.
In November 2008, as Lucky and Gurjeet made plans, Lakhvir Singh attended a family event in India. There she found a solution to her situation, one that she hoped would blow any wedding plans out of the water. In late November 2008, 44-year-old Lakhvir Singh returned to the UK from India, determined to drive a wedge between 39-year-old Lakhvinder Cheema and his new fiancée, Gurjeet.
Singh was saying to him, look, you don't really want to be going out with this woman because she's illegal in the country and all she basically wants is a passport.
Singh's attempts to sour the relationship fell on deaf ears.
In early December, Gurjeet and Lucky give details of when they're going to get married. The following February.
To add insult to injury, Lucky and Gurjeet decided to get married on Valentine's Day, 2009, which simply rubbed salt into the wounds of Lakhvir Singh.
A few days after announcing their wedding plans, Lucky fell gravely ill.
Lucky had had a period of sickness that had come on quite quickly, hadn't been fully diagnosed, but he had had several days of really quite extreme, what was probably sort of put down to sort of either food poisoning or sort of gastroenteritis.
Singh attends almost every day to visit him in hospital. And during that time, she's still trying to convince him that he shouldn't get married to Gurjeet.
I think Gurjeet realised that the relationship with Singh was still continuing.
So she took Singh aside and to try and warn her off and basically told her, look, forget it, he's my man now.
In response, Singh dropped a bombshell that she hoped might put 21-year-old Gurjeet off for good.
She told Gurjeet she'd become pregnant on at least 2 occasions, and Lucky apparently wanted her to have abortions. She was trying everything to claw the relationship back, panicking in this state of chaos. She even threw in threats, serious threats, threats of arson, threats of harm to him. But this is not unusual in a situation like this, where the person is actually escalating and becoming more and more dangerous.
Lucky spent 2 or 3 days in hospital feeling pretty ill, but thought perhaps nothing of it at the time, perhaps food poisoning.
After he's released from hospital, we know that this is almost close to Christmas, and you'd have thought that he would be with Gurjeet during this period, but completely the opposite. He spends the entire Christmas with Singh. It just goes to show you the level of control to some degree that Singh had over Lucky.
Despite his mixed messages, Lucky's wedding planning continued, and in January 2009, Gurjeet started spending the odd night with him at his home in Feltham.
When you got to January 2009, his attitude to Lakhvir changed. Notably, he stopped sleeping with her.
On the 27th of January, with less than 3 weeks to go until their marriage, Lucky and Gurjeet shared a meal in the kitchen of Lucky's home.
Gurjeet and Lucky were discussing their wedding plans.
But the couple would never get to share their vows. Just a few hours later, Gurjeet was seriously ill and Lakhvir Cheema was dead.
Lucky had presented himself at the hospital along with Gurjeet.
Gurjeet was immediately put into an induced coma because she was so ill. The doctors tried to revive Lucky, but he died at about 2:30 in the morning.
Medics had no idea what had struck down the previously healthy couple. But in his final breaths, Lakhvir Cheema had given them a major clue.
In the hour that he was alive, between arriving at the hospital and he's finally dying, Lucky was able to whisper to doctors, "It was my ex-girlfriend."
So on the 28th of January 2009, the police were alerted by Middlesex Hospital of a very suspicious incident whereby a relatively healthy male had died with very shocking and sudden symptoms.
DCI Howard Groves led the Metropolitan Police homicide team that took the call from West Middlesex Hospital.
My team at that point decided that we would treat it as a murder investigation, and then that would allow us to establish the facts.
The homicide command would have sent an initial response team to attend the hospital, obviously to speak to the doctors concerned. The sister and nephews of the deceased had actually taken him to hospital, so they were key witnesses who could explain to the hospital and us exactly what had been happening.
The team also reviewed a 999 call made by Lakhvir Cheema the previous evening.
Okay, is your girlfriend conscious?
Yes,
Is she awake?
yes, same like me. But we are very worried though because
Okay, so what makes you think somebody poisoned your food?
because she was my ex-girlfriend. She came to visit my house.
You think your ex-girlfriend's done it?
Detectives looked into the meal the couple had been sharing shortly before Lucky made the call.
It was actually a curry that Gurjeet had made, and they'd eaten that meal the night before, where there was quite a significant amount of leftovers, which had been put into a Tupperware pot and which they had put on Lucky's shelf in the fridge.
Gurjeet hadn't been well and she didn't really want to eat very much. Lucky, on the other hand, had been working hard and was ravenous. He ate 2 portions of the curry while she ate very little. It was a decision that was to cost him his life.
About an hour and a half after eating their dinner, he started feeling extremely unwell.
He had violent vomiting. He's described how his sight was going. Everything became dark. He couldn't feel his hands, his legs. He said he couldn't even feel his tongue when he was holding it. And he couldn't stand up straight. He had to support himself. This was very, very frightening.
He deteriorated quickly and was in very significant pain.
Gurjeet decided she was going to have a shower, and by the time she came back down, his condition had worsened, and now she was beginning to feel similar symptoms. They called 999. The operator speaks to Lucky and asks whether or not he had got food poisoning, and he said, "No, I have been poisoned."
Someone put poison in our food.
Why would someone put poison in your food?
Clearly, he was acutely aware that something quite serious had probably happened to both of them. He also phoned his sister, who lived very close by, because he was really panicking.
And the family came round, in fact, before the emergency services were due to be there. He was carried out, and it was him being taken to a car of a nephew that was just caught on CCTV. He was obviously in really significant distress, in very significant pain, in and out of consciousness.
Gurjeet was also ill. She herself has described how her eyes started to go completely. Her tummy was hurting, she couldn't stand up properly. And she too was bundled into the car to take her off to hospital. And she described how she was trying to reach out her hand to hold Lucky's hand, and she couldn't move her hands because of the paralysis. The car taking Lucky screeched to a halt outside the West Middlesex Hospital, and Lucky was rushed inside. But there was nothing they can do. And within an hour of arriving at the hospital, Lucky was dead.
Gurjeet, by now, was also in a very, very poorly condition, and she was actually placed into a coma.
With one patient dead and another's life in the balance, medics faced a race against time to discover what deadly illness had befallen the betrothed couple. She may have lost her fiancé, but could Gurjeet's life be saved? On the 28th of January 2009, the Met Police's homicide unit launched an investigation into the highly unusual death of Lakhvinder Lucky Cheema, who died in agony at a West London hospital.
When Lucky arrived at the hospital, he was adamant that he had been poisoned. I took the view that we had to treat it as if it was a poisoning. We couldn't say to ourselves, we'll wait for the post-mortem and see what happens next.
We rarely dealt with cases of poisoning. Our general day-to-day murders would be shootings, stabbings, gangland type killings. So this really stood out as an unusual case, and certainly one that I had never dealt with in the past.
Unused to treating poisoning of this intensity, medics wondered if they were dealing with some kind of biological or chemical weapon.
There were a lot of concerns that there was potentially cyanide poisoning involved. So it was treated incredibly seriously, and in terms of the deceased's body, that was put into a sealed room, and everyone had to wear sort of specialist protective equipment, specialist breathing equipment, because obviously if it had been cyanide, that is incredibly dangerous.
While murder was one scenario for detectives to consider, they also had to find out if there was another explanation. Contamination in the food chain that could have caused Lucky's death and which might strike another innocent victim at any moment.
We decided to contact the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, because they have the knowledge and expertise to look at food and its production. And they said to us that they didn't have any records of anyone presenting themselves to the hospitals throughout the UK in the last 72 hours with any similar symptoms.
With the ball back in their court, the police faced the urgent challenge of identifying what the poison could be. As Gurjeet continued fighting for her life, knowledge of the substance could help the medics trying to save her.
The agency that we were advised to contact was the Health Protection Agency. They had the necessary expertise to be able to attend Lucky's home in hazmat suits, and they retrieved the Tupperware, that the remains of some of the meal that was consumed.
While analysis began on the remnants of the curry, police officers had to act on Lucky Cheema's suspicions about his former lover, Lakhvir Singh.
On Wednesday the 28th, Singh was arrested.
She was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Lucky, and also at that point the attempted murder of Gurjeet.
When the police arrived at Singh's house, far from being angry or involved or emotional, She was very calm and collected, made out that she had no idea what they were there for. Clearly, by this stage, Singh knew that Lucky was dead. This was the man she had loved, the one love in her life, and had been in a relationship for 16 years. And here she was, giving a very calm, composed response to the arrival of the police and for the fact that she was being arrested.
Lakhvir Singh was not the only person of interest for police. Another relative, a man with ties to both Singh and Lucky, was also taken in for questioning.
On the day of the poisoning of Gurjeet and Lucky, a family member had actually attended Lucky's address and spoken to Gurjeet.
He had threatened Lucky that very day, the shame he was bringing on the wider family.
But even as police questioned this man, their colleagues were uncovering evidence that he was not the likely assailant.
At the time of Singh's arrest, a search was conducted at her address, and the officers recovered from a coat that she had hanging over the banister a brown substance. And not only did they find a brown substance in a plastic bag, they also found something similar in a handbag.
Suspecting this unknown substance could be linked with Lucky's death and Gurjeet's perilous condition, it was imperative detectives find out what it was.
The first thing that the police did was to confront Singh and say, "What is this brown powder?" And she acted completely nonchalantly and say, "Oh, that's nothing, that's just a bit of herbal stuff that I have for a neck rash."
My colleagues were not happy with that and actually explained and said, look, someone has died and there's someone very seriously ill in hospital. If the doctors knew exactly what was in that bag, then they could have come up with a solution as to how they were going to treat Gurjeet. We knew more than likely it was a poison, but there are hundreds and thousands of different poisons, but she wouldn't tell us exactly what it was.
It's not clear whether Singh intended Gurjeet to die as well. And it's quite possible that she saw her as irrelevant and that if she does, it's all good. If she doesn't, it doesn't matter because he'll be dead anyway and she can't have him.
Still none the wiser, investigators hoped Lucky Cheema's post-mortem might reveal some answers about what had killed him.
I remember personally being at the post-mortem that was conducted by a very eminent pathologist, and I remember that he received sort of sealed instructions, I think from something like Portland Down, of how to deal with a potential cyanide poisoning, and we all had to wear sort of chemical protective overalls, breathing apparatus. It's the only time I've ever had to do that at a post-mortem. There were multiple samples taken from Lucky's body, and that would have included, stomach contents, blood, urine, hair, everything that could possibly be tested to give an indication of what he had ingested and what had caused his death.
The post-mortem was inconclusive. While detectives awaited the results of toxicology tests on Lucky's blood and stomach contents, time was running out to hold Lakhvir Singh on suspicion of Lucky's murder. They needed to establish a link between the spurned lover and Lucky's sudden illness.
The police were able to put together some of the events leading up to his death.
The tenants living in Lucky's home were key witnesses to the events of that day.
On the 27th of January, around about 10:30 in the morning, Singh went to Lucky's house. She knocked on the door and she was allowed entry by one of the other tenants who lived in one of the upstairs bedrooms. There was nothing unusual about this whatsoever. She was a regular visitor to the house.
Gurjeet was actually staying at Lucky's home at that point, and she wasn't feeling well and had spent most of the day sleeping. The tenants that were in the address were all sitting in the kitchen chatting. Singh went straight to the fridge, opened the door, and with her back to them, she took out an item from the fridge. They couldn't see what she was doing.
She knew about Lucky's habits, whereabouts in the address he lived, which part of the refrigerator he used for his food. She, of all people, would have known where the curry to be consumed by him was going to be in the fridge.
She then closed it up and put it back in the fridge, had a little chat with them, and then left. Now, for the tenants, that didn't raise any alarms. We know that when Lucky came home and he was told that she had turned up, he actually did something which was quite strange. He changed the locks on the back door and the front door, which would indicate he didn't want her there.
At that point, I think Lucky must have been feeling actually very, very uneasy about the relationship and how it had broken down and how it was actually affecting Singh.
Having decided to get the locks changed, he phoned Singh in a fury to demand an answer to, what were you doing in my house? And she just told him, we're coming to get you. And me and 5 other men, which of course only added to the sense of fear and trepidation that Lucky had. What on earth was Singh going to do next?
Singh made some very serious threats, and I think Lucky was probably stuck between being really quite frightened of her and what she might do, but also how is he going to tell anyone? How is he actually going to deal with this?
Detectives had quickly built a picture of an obsessive, threatening ex who'd been seen acting oddly in Lucky Cheema's home the day he and Gurjeet mysteriously fell ill. But they still didn't know for sure that they'd been poisoned, or indeed, what with.
It was a circumstantial case. We didn't have an eyewitness here.
After 2 days, Gurjeet began to show signs of recovery. Her testimony would help police build a better picture of the toxic love triangle. But could the police really prove beyond reasonable doubt that mother of 3 Lakhvir Singh was a cold-blooded killer? In January 2009, detectives in West London faced the uphill struggle of proving that 44-year-old Lakhvir Singh had deliberately poisoned her former lover, Lucky Cheema, and his fiancée, Gurjeet.
By the 31st of January, the detectives felt they had enough circumstantial evidence to charge Lakhvir with the murder of Lucky and the attempted murder of Gurjeet. But they still didn't know what precisely the poison was that she'd used.
They needed to work out what Lucky had been poisoned with to establish that link between the substances they had found and the suspect.
Detectives reached out to a poisons expert to find out what substance could have caused Lucky's devastating symptoms.
The poisons experts explained to the detectives, finally, that it was likely that Lucky and Gurjeet had been poisoned with aconite, sometimes known as wolfsbane, the queen of poisons.
It's an exceptionally unusual poison in this country. The last case of aconite poisoning was in 1882, never since.
The police turned to Professor Monique Simmons, a researcher and botanist with expertise in identifying plant compounds.
They sometimes come to Kew because of the collections at Kew, the living specimens we have, but also the estimated 8 million in our herbarium collection. And we were aware that it could be, therefore, aconitum because of the symptoms. So we asked to hear a little bit more about the symptoms. Again, we're not medics, but we have some of that knowledge about what potentially the toxins can be. Aconitum has an effect on the organs breaking down. The victim is very much, aware of what is happening. They can't breathe. and things like that.
Professor Simmons was given samples of all of the evidence the police had gathered.
If you look then at the samples we've been given, some material that has come from Mrs. Singh's pocket, some from the remains of the curry, etc., and then from samples from the victim's stomach and blood, we make an extract. So now we've got samples that we can inject into the equipment that we use, and that will help analyze that extract so we get what we term kind of a chemical fingerprint. It's not the same as a DNA fingerprint, but in our terms it enables us to identify the different compounds that are in that extract that we've made.
Analysis of Lucky's blood and stomach contents found that not only was it chemically the same as the toxins found in the samples of leftover curry in his fridge, it was also the same as the powder found in Lakhvir Singh's handbag and coat pocket. But what was puzzling was that it didn't match the profile of aconite commonly found in the UK.
And then that's where we heard a little bit more about the case of this is a lady who went to India. Okay, right, you think, let's look at a species then, Ferox from India. And then you get slightly different chemistry. And then, wow, the chemistry meets what we would expect.
Professor Simmons was able to say conclusively that the substance was a match for Indian aconite. Pieces of the jigsaw were finally falling into place in the case against Lakhvir Singh, who'd visited her native India around the time Lucky's engagement was announced.
It was several weeks before the incident that led to death. Where exactly she went, we don't know. But the fact is, there are marketplaces in that part of India, in northern India, just south of the Himalayas, where you can buy almost anything.
So we took the view from an evidential standpoint that we say that that's where she got the item from.
Lucky had been hospitalized with a stomach complaint just days after Singh had returned, but on that occasion he'd pulled through. Detectives now suspected this had been Singh's first attempt on Lucky's life. As her trial date approached, Lakhvir Singh continued to deny the charges against her.
12 months after Lucky's death, the trial opened at the Old Bailey in January 2010. Once I found out the background to this case, then this was a date in my diary that was ringed in red. This was going to be a huge case.
Singh faced charges of murdering Lucky as well as attempting to murder Gurjeet. She also faced an attempted murder charge for the incident where Lucky had fallen ill a month or so before he died.
The opening statement, opening speech of a prosecutor is a very important tool in a way, because it's how the jury first get introduced to the case. In a way, I had an advantage because it was a fascinating case. I was able to present the reality of a woman who just couldn't take it that her lover, who she was still in love with or maybe even obsessed by, had moved from his affections from her to this younger woman, and she was jealous and obsessively jealous. There was an element of a physical relationship continuing, but she could not face the fact of the impending marriage. She gathered in India the wherewithal in preparation to kill her former lover.
Edward Brown KC told the jury about Lucky's mysterious illness in December 2008.
His illness and his visit to the hospital were after the defendant, Mrs. Singh, had returned from India.
With Lucky having survived a first attempt on his life, the prosecution's case was that in late January 2009, Lakhvir Singh laced the curry in his fridge with a much stronger dose of poison, enough to end his life.
Gurjeet, with the assistance of an interpreter, gave her account of what happened on the day in question.
The Old Bailey is a very intimidating place to be. And poor Gurjeet was there. She'd barely been in this country more than a year or so. She was giving evidence about the murder of her fiancé, the person she planned to spend the rest of her life with. She couldn't speak the language. She looked very alone and very, very vulnerable.
We know that one of the tenants also gave evidence of Singh retrieving the Tupperware with the food content in there. And there were specialists who then gave evidence in relation to aconite and the symptoms for being poisoned.
Sitting silently in court, occasionally tearful, Lakhvir Singh, through her lawyer, denied the charges against her.
Part of Lakhvir's defence when she comes to trial is that the actual murder wasn't committed by her, but was committed by a relative of both she and Lucky.
Gurjeet confirmed on the witness stand that this man had threatened Lucky on the day he died.
Lakhvir also maintained in her own defence that she couldn't possibly have killed him because she loved him. When the jury retired to consider their verdict after the 5-week trial, they deliberated for no fewer than 4 days. Really quite a long time.
When the jury file back into court with their verdicts, it's always a very, very tense moment because literally nobody apart from those 12 people know what the verdict's going to be.
The jury convicted Mrs. Singh of murder of Lucky. They were not sure that Mrs. Singh intended to kill Gurjeet, but they convicted her of causing her GBH. They acquitted her of the earlier poisoning as we presented it, maybe because the scientific evidence wasn't there.
Singh looked mousy, she looked very sort of inward, she looked a tiny figure between the prison officers. She looked beaten, she looked subdued. I think she knew almost from the start that she was going to be convicted and that she would have to live with what she's done for the rest of her life.
Lakhvir Singh was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 23 years in prison.
I recall the judge stating that she hadn't just acted in an explosive act of revenge, it was a very cold and calculated murder.
I think she probably was, generally speaking, quite a cold person, quite an entitled person, and somebody who felt that she had some kind of right to control her partners.
UK women's rights charities have found that more than half of women who kill their partner do so in response to domestic violence or abuse. Lakhvir Singh falls into a rare category of women who plan a homicide for another reason entirely. In her case, rageful revenge.
There's this anger and outrage at the injustice of you deciding to leave me. And I do think that in this case, Singh did think she'd suffered an injustice. She thought Lucky was going to be with her forever. And it was terrible that he suddenly decided to go off and get engaged.
I didn't see a single trace of remorse. It's virtually impossible to imagine that she would have any remorse because this was a planned operation. And it achieved exactly what she wanted, which was the agonizing death of her former lover.
When Lakhvir Singh's secret lover made plans for a future with someone else, it was more than she could bear. Unwilling to see Lucky Cheema find happiness and a family with his new fiancée, Singh set out to end his life, grievously harming Gurjeet in the process. For a murder meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed, Lakhvir Singh will always be remembered as one of Britain's most evil killers.